this afternoon for Code Switching, the second topic in our Cohesion Amongst Chaos BIPOC Summer Speaker Series. My name is April Worrell. I'm a mixed Filipino-American painter and the co-chair of the Cohesion Art Collective. Our mission is to connect and amplify local BIPOC artists. We believe that art intrinsically creates representation, sparks conversation, and is an accessible way to share and learn about culture. We are thrilled to spotlight 4 BIPOC artists on stage today: visual artist Janaina Vieira-Marques, piece and pop artist Moses Bushiri, and musician and storyteller Dylan Runningcrane. Leading our discussion today is the very talented Joseph Grady. Joseph Grady is an actor, artist, and higher education professional with many film and television roles to his credit. Joseph is a graduate of UM with a degree in social work and focuses in Native American studies and theater. He has served the Missoula community in a public speaking capacity for more than a decade and has repeatedly answered the call to advocate for social justice in the region. Joseph has served on various boards and committees like the Missoula Food Bank's Anti-Racism Task Force, UM's Critical Advising Practices for Equity Committee, the Media Training Center's Indigenous Cultural Outreach Film Committee, the Missoula Children Theater's DEI Committee, and the former chair of Tell Us Something's Board of Directors. In his professional academic career, Joseph Grady served as the Associate Director for Montana 10 at the University of Montana and Missoula College. In this role, Joseph has been integral in increasing enrollment at UM by providing specialized cultural leadership with a focus on student support, mentorship, and guidance. Please welcome our panel.
Well, hello everybody and welcome and thanks for being here today. Today's conversation will be discussing code switching. If you're not familiar with the term, hopefully we can bring a little more light to this and see where each of us experience this in our own lives and where the folks and the lovely people up here on stage have their own experiences. As you heard, my name is Joseph Grady. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Blackfeet or Unskapi Pekani. I am an actor, artist, academic advisor, program director, social worker, etc., etc. I want to acknowledge my own male privilege in this space for the purpose of being respectful. This is a conversation and we are not here as experts per se, but there being diversity represented here, I do think we have our own informed experiences. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge, take a moment to acknowledge and reflect on the tens of thousands of years of Indigenous history in this place. From its earliest inhabitants dating back to a time immemorial, to the most recent peoples pushed out by manifest destiny. This includes our fellow creature inhabitants, the walkers, crawlers, flyers, and swimmers. Let's also be mindful that as Indigenous people, we still exist and thrive in these ancient and sacred spaces, so please be respectful and mindful of that experience as we gather here today. Thank you. As BIPOC who live here locally, we bring our own personal experience from throughout our lifetime to the creative process in some way or another. Sometimes those factors are quite nuanced, while others take a more direct path to interpretation. We are indeed storied people involved, imbued with hard-earned truths and experiences. That said, we are not locked entirely into tragedy or plight narratives, and I like to be clear about that. Certainly the struggles and oppression felt throughout BIPOC communities are deeply felt by many, and the tragedy of police violence is certainly not lost on us. However, this is not the sum of our parts, and though we do place considerable energy into organizing around the losses we see happening every day, we do also embrace humor, celebration, success, and mirth. I'm sure today's conversation has the opportunity to move in any of these directions, and so I ask our audience to please recognize and acknowledge the courage and generosity of our panelists for joining us here today. So please, without further ado, please join me in a moment of applause and welcome these amazing creative talents. All right, let's be mindful, attentive, and intentional in our listening as we take this time to meet our panelists. We're just going to sort of go across the board, and I'm just going to ask you one by one to please introduce yourself and perhaps share with the audience a little about your creative outlet and what you do here locally.
Hi, my name is Janaina Vieira-Marques. I'm a Brazilian American. I have been living in Missoula for the past 15 years, in the United States for the past 17 years. I'm an artist, I'm a community organizer, I'm also an educator. I work at the Missoula Museum as the Educator Outreach Coordinator, and I have work in the film industry, work with professional designers and building set designs and as a graphic designer, and now I'm an educator. So lots of artistic background. I feel really honored to be here and to be one of the speakers for this panel. I think those are the conversations that we are waiting to have. So thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Moses Bushiri. I'm an artist. Sorry, my English is very poor. I speak French. So if you understand something happen, I'm not good in English. So I'm here in Missoula for 4 years and 6 months now. Painting, I make African painting. My passion is to show people the image of Africa, the image of hope, the image of peace in Africa. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
My name is Dylan Runningcrane. I am Blackfeet. I'm the same tribe as Joseph over there. I promise that has nothing to do with how we chose this panel. Blackfeet supremacy. I'm a musician in Missoula. I've been playing music for a few years now. I was originally in a band with Stellar Noel right there. I'm doing some more solo stuff, and I work with film projects, and I worked with the museum that Janaina works at, and yeah, I like to call myself a musician and a storyteller here in Missoula. I'm excited to be here too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, all of you, for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about code switching. According to dictionary.com, code switching is as follows. Now, there's two different definitions, linguistic and sociolinguistic. The first being the alternating or mixed use of two or more languages, especially within the same discourse. And this has also been referred to as translanguaging. Sociolinguistics, in that regard, it is the use of one dialect, register, accent, or language variety over another, depending on social or cultural context, to project a specific identity source, or a specific identity, excuse me. And then, of course, looking at the Harvard Business Review, April actually shared this little piece with us online, and I thought it was an interesting observation about code switching. Broadly, code switching involves adjusting one's style of speech, appearance, behavior, and expression in ways that will optimize the comfort of others in exchange for fair treatment, quality service, and employment opportunities, and so much more. So that's it. Typically, when we examine code switching, and those of us who navigate these types of conversations in racial justice circles and so forth, identify essentially 5 or more areas. Of course, I've kind of listed a few here in terms of how we ourselves engage in the practice of code switching. One being to be completely inadvertent. We're not aware, or always aware of when we're doing it, and maybe that's just because we do it so often, that switch happens without much forethought or afterthought. There's also the desire to fit in. I think that's a pretty common way of performing in society, right? We want to fit in, not be the weirdo that often we are in our own homes. Upward mobility or job security. Now this is one that I certainly am personally very much attached to in terms of what I do professionally. It simplifies interaction. That's it's kind of one of those things you heard, like accommodating others. I think we'll talk about that likely a little bit today. And then it reduces harms from existing stigmas. So all those stigmas that are floating out there, basically one's ability to hide in plain sight is how it's been referred to. So without further ado, let's get to some questions. I'm going to throw some things out here. This is very much a conversation with these folks on stage. And so we haven't really sort of choreographed this, if you will. What I'm trying to get at here is just a conversation, some reflection, feedback on some of these questions. And if something else comes up, we tend to move in that direction. And if it comes to mind, please feel free to just speak up. Let's get into it. So the first question that I have is, are you always, and I think this has to do with what we just talked about there, are you always conscious of the moments when you are actively code switching or assuming a persona, presentation, different from how you are in familiar surroundings? That could be either at home or amongst friends, like cultural influences and connections. Yeah.
Well, Janaina and I were talking about this just as we both came into the green room back there. When we were talking about how and why we were nervous to do this, was we were thinking like, it just happened so subconsciously that I don't know if I have a lot to say about it. No, I got talking, and obviously we have a lot to say about it. But I was telling her I just got back from the Blackfeet powwow up in Browning, spent the weekend there, and even just the drive here, I can kind of feel my Blackfeet humor, my Blackfeet slang sort of like slip away as I prepare to come back into Missoula. But I feel like the only reason I was conscious of it is because I knew that this was happening today. But any other time, I think it's pretty subconscious.
I love that. You mentioned Indigenous identity, just to kind of take that road just briefly here. Reservation Dogs, those who are familiar with the television show, is literally the lifting of that veil, if you will, which to me is what makes that program so rich. And I've said it over and over again, I've waited like 50 some years for that television show. And to be able to laugh and have that humor out in the open in a broad context is like life-changing for me. But then to hear that sort of leaving it behind piece was, I think, a kind of a fascinating thing. I hadn't really thought about it like that, but I can actually kind of contextualize that in my mind.
So for me, it's really wonderful to hear what you're saying about not being conscious about what's happening, but kind of it's happening and you can change according to the place that you are. And I think for me, many times I'm not conscious anymore, but I think I started this journey because I'm an immigrant in the United States, being conscious about the change that I needed to navigate a different culture, right? And those changes where sometimes there's not only the language, but it's the body language, is the way you present yourself, is the way you gesticulate, is the way that you greet somebody. So yes, I'm conscious and sometimes I'm not. I'm more conscious now because I raised 2 kids in this country. So I'm very attentive to the content and the things that I bring to my house, as I want my kids to grow up speaking Portuguese, which is my primary language. But as soon as I leave my house, there is something that changed. And this change just happens because I think I became a little bit more used to them. But there are times that I'm so comfortable with the person that's around me that, my way of being as a Brazilian bridges into my way of being as a Brazilian American. One example, I would be like having a really wonderful conversation with somebody, and when I finish, I would say, okay, bye, and I would send kisses. And those situations, you know, many times if they are my friends and they know me, they would sometimes just send me kisses back. But I had situations where I was so comfortable with somebody that I knew through other friends that I did the same thing, and this person just looked at me, I was doing something super weird. And then I was like, oh, shoot, I'm not supposed to do this here. So it's like, it's a constant effort when you're not from a specific place. And it's really interesting because when I go back to Brazil, I don't feel 100% from Brazil. And when I'm here, I don't feel from here, so I'm in between two cultures. So code switching is something that helps me to navigate in between the two cultures. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure, the idea of the accommodation piece, I think, is like really what I tend to hit on myself a lot. Leaving the house, there's a regimented set of preparations that go into effect, basically, where I'm not always conscious of it, but I know that I'm going to be out in society, and I know for me that it's a simplification of the kind of stuff that I have to endure typically. And those are from microaggressions to uninvited questions that are like inappropriate or uncomfortable, awkward, and so forth. And so a lot of me leaving the home is very much accommodating that stuff, especially when I get into professional higher academics. And even in this space, the way that I speak is not how I present myself at home. There's a lot more foul language, I think, slipping into the narrative, but that's just me being sort of comfortable in my surroundings and so forth. So I do switch it up. But what we see.
Yeah, for me, I can say I'm not born here, so difficult for me is to integrate in people, because the problem is the language. So if you don't know how to speak a language, it's difficult for you. And sometimes I have some problems like to talk to people, but I have friends here in Missoula now. They help me how to integrate in the community. I have my mom as my friend. But in all my painting I make, I try to show people what I need here in America. I think in the future, everything will be okay for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much. Let's go a little further. When in your life, in experiencing code switching, when is it an expected part of sort of the game, if you will, is how I've heard it referred to? Professionalism, your goals to either move toward a career or some kind of successful income. Where do you find yourselves having to be either performative or creative in that navigation? Or have you? I mean, is that something that, particularly as artists and people in a creative sense, is it an expectation as you navigate the art community here in Missoula?
Yes. I think that one of the things that as I grew up, started to kind of resent, is like growing up in Browning, you know, I can accept that part of me now of like the accent and the humor and the slang, and but for a while, especially in high school, I like really suppressed it. Mostly because of that fear of like going into more professional spaces, moving off of the res, and finding myself feeling othered or isolated. And it mostly, like, when I was working at the museum, actually, our janitor was named, he was from Hart Butte, which is really close to Browning, John Rattler. And he just became like my best buddy there, because it was that safe space of like joking in the way that I would be joking at home. And just knowing that that person was in the space really sort of lets you breathe a little bit. But in every other space, you know, you have to gauge those reactions first. You have to push a little bit, see if there's a bad reaction. You have to, and that can be really stifling, and it can also be kind of, you know, dehumanizing in a way that you don't expect. So that's my experience with that.
Anyone else?
For me, I think about code switching. It's superpower skill. I don't know if that makes sense. When we start like thinking about, in my case, 2 languages, 2 cultures, right? Or my own identity in America, which is really interesting because when I'm in Brazil, I'm the majority. When I'm in America, I'm the minority. So I'm thinking about like how, I don't think it's strategically say I needed to be in a certain way to fit here, but it comes naturally, right? So you start like observing around you, observing how people interact to each other, and it's kind of like when I say a superpower skill, is that you embrace that and you're able to navigate. But there were situations where I was trying to be part of something or a group, or, you know, and not really understanding the nuances of that certain group, and then feeling the outsider. And I don't think that happens to me as much professionally as it would happen to me socially. You know, because professionally, especially in Missoula, I have been building up my career which was a little different than what I had in Brazil. I was a film producer in Brazil. Here I became a sculptor and then a community organizer and educator. So people around me saw that growth and embraced me for who I am. So it was easy in that sense. But as you're navigating the world in a community that's not that diverse, there are challenges of, you know, trying to understand the cultural norms and trying to fit in just to be accepted. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's a balance, maybe not super conscious, but it is conscious sometimes.
Moise, you had mentioned something that's kind of sticking in my mind. In terms of your art and your creativity, it provides you something that you need. And I'm sure that's, in my mind, that translates as connection to place and story and history and your own experience and so forth. And what has your experience as an artist in this local community been like? In terms of maybe what the outward expectation is of you as an artist and where you come from, versus what it is that you're putting out to the world?
This is a big question. That's how we try to speak. For me, my painting, I know Missoula is many people is talented. So I remember when my first time when I came here in this place to show people my work. So I was happy to see people interested to see what I need to show about the picture I made. So my passion is I need to show people in America and in Missoula about the image of Africa, because many people, when you say Africa, people see war, people see sick, people see immigration. So my passion for me, I need to show people we have something good in Africa. I know we have many problems, but we have something like talented we can show people, like the nature of Africa, like the color of Africa, like people is very careful. So this is my passion. This is I need to show every day when I need to make something. I think, what can I show people to something they need to make? Sorry for my English. I'm very poor.
You're really good.
Yeah, in fact, that also kind of brings up another point, I think, and I was thinking about that when doing your intro. I think that this accommodation piece is oftentimes at our own expense, over maybe the equal part effort of those around us to do that attentive listening piece. And I think that's I actually intentionally included in my opening that we really take time to listen and hear some of the frustrations that you can just like flick on the news or go to YouTube. YouTube's actually a great place to find this garbage. You can find like a million like clips of people losing their patience and maybe even their sense of humanity and decency because they are finding it intolerant or the inability to tolerate another person's accent, traditional language, especially if, and I don't know if anyone here has experienced this, but I've seen it and have confronted it as well, that maybe you're talking your own language to someone that you know familiar in the community, the people around get frustrated in some way. That, I think, is part of this code switching thing that makes us really poignant, where you find yourself maybe feeling that it's somehow your responsibility to gain other people's understanding as opposed to maybe asking for greater patience in how people listen and their capacity to listen. That's something that sticks out of my mind, and I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but either way, at least for me, I think the struggle to understand is where I'm going to find you in this, and at least that's what I'm kind of hoping for to come out of this conversation, is that that we listen and we try and understand even what you're struggling with to communicate to us, because sadly enough I don't speak French, and I didn't pursue it, and I haven't like really pursued even myself the ability to go outside of this continent to accommodate others in their space as well. And maybe that's a privilege, maybe that's a fault on my own part, I'm not sure, but certainly it gives me like food for thought as we kind of have this moment. But thank you very much. And hopefully you won't always have to feel the need to apologize in the spaces that you enter into. And maybe something just for us to kind of reflect on, but thank you. All right, so when in your own experience has code switching been an effort to hide in plain sight? Has it? And by the way, I mentioned this last time too, as we go through these questions, you as well are invited to reflect on these moments, because it's not just racial identity. We have many identities in our communities and in our culture, and so be thinking about these questions as well for yourself.
I have a story. It was this weekend. So I'm camping and floating with my family, with two friends that came from California. And they came with the little boy. And my kids and the little boy are friends. So at night, I went to the tent to say goodnight to my daughter. And there was something that was happening over there that she wants to communicate with me, and she changed the language in front of her friend to Portuguese. And she explained everything to me in Portuguese. In that time, we had like a superpower, right? Nobody could understand what you're saying and what she was saying. And this little boy, who is about to turn 7, look at her and say, "Hey, can you please explain to me why did you start talking to your mother in a language that I cannot understand? What is the reason?" And I'm outside understanding what it is, because I know that what she was talking about was an event that happens between them and they have to solve the problem, etc. And then she looks at him and she says, "You know, that is the way that I want to talk to my mom in private. And it's nothing about you, but in this moment I need some privacy." So that is one of the stories. Yeah, there are many times where I'm with my family and there's something happening and I want to just connect with them in privacy, and language becomes the conduit for that to happen. Right? This is one. So it's kind of like hiding a little bit for communication to happen in a smooth way, or in our own benefit, I think.
I love it, thank you.
Yeah, I was, it's so interesting talking to like different people about this, because my mind is just like, wants to say 5 million different things, but I have to take a second to collect them. But one of the things that question made me think of, and then your story, was in terms of like hiding in plain sight. I think Indigenous people have this sort of, there's a difference here, right? Because there's no technical racial aspect to indigeneity. There's, at least not in my opinion, some people disagree. I don't think there is. I think that that tribal unity and the language is the thing that connects us, and culture. And so a lot of the times, right, people who are Indigenous can be white passing. They can be, they can't hide in plain sight in this way. And then something will flip on a dime and you'll be like, "Oh, hey cousin, you're from Browning. I see you now." And I think that your story was reminding me of like when you kind of like have that connection with somebody and you're able to fully embody, you know, that indigeneity in front of like non-Indigenous people. Other people get to experience that joy and like community with you. That there's so many beautiful, even in the Blackfeet language itself, right? There's so many concepts that just don't exist in English. And when you learn those words, like I think there's no official word in Blackfeet for "I'm sorry." And that makes you really take time to think about the things that you say. It forces you to like take immediate accountability for the things that you do. Because you can't just turn around and say, "I'm sorry," and then your responsibility goes away. And so when you stop that hiding in plain sight and you are given the space to sort of embody that, your identity and where you come from, and you don't have to apologize, other people learn from that too and glean things from it too. That's what that made me think of. I hope that made sense.
Awesome, thank you, Dylan.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Maurice?
I can say for me, the the language is not just for me. For example, for many people come from out of America. So when you're born in, like, for your country, for example, like here in America, you speak just English. But for me, in my country, we speak 5 languages. We speak Swahili, we speak French, and we speak some Bantu language in my country. So when you go out of your country and you come to the country like US, it's very difficult for you to learn the language. But if it's a kid, he can speak fast. When you go at school with another kid, he can speak fast. But for people like me, people like people from like another continent, you speak a language, you don't understand nothing. For example, for me, I remember when I go to visit my friend, he told me, he said, I remember that, I don't forget that. He said, I need to buy for you a hot dog. I said, what? Hot dog? I asked him, what do you mean hot dog? He said, I say, you eat dog? I said, no. It's a bread with something. I said, oh. So I was scared. So in America, people eat dog. So this is the problem about the language. So if you are not born a place you go, it's difficult for you to adapt the system of the place you go. In my country, we speak French at school, at home. The system in my country, at school, the teacher beats kids to learn French. So if you don't know how to speak French, you can never get a job, you can never go up something, so it will be difficult for you. But now I'm learning little step by step, and I think in future I will speak very, very, very English.
Yeah, please jump in.
I just want to say something that Dylan made me think about when you talk about the Blackfeet language not having a, you said,
No phrase for I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, right? It's interesting because that I can relate to this idea of I'm sorry and thank you in the United States is very different than what it is for my culture where I grew up. So the I'm sorry took me a long time to understand in this culture that you say I'm sorry as a way of recognizing that somebody is hurt or telling you that doesn't like something. But doesn't mean that you are sorry. You just use the word, at least that way. So I would have, my husband was raised in the United States, but he's Brazilian, so he speaks Portuguese as well. We met in Brazil. But one of the things that about our relationship, to navigate the relationship, is to understand when you say I'm sorry and when you say thank you. So in Brazilian culture, thank you, you don't say thank you to people that are close to you and do things for you. Really weird, right? It's a different concept. So if your mother brings you like a bowl of soup and cooks for you, and you look at your mother, you give her a hug, you don't say thank you. Because when you say thank you to your mother, she's gonna tell you like this. You don't need to thank me. I am family. That's what family is for. And when you are somebody tells you that you're doing something wrong, it's not like you go to time out, you're doing something wrong, your mother is going to tell you, or your family is going to tell you, go to your room, think about what you did. When you're ready, come back and talk to me. And then if you're sorry, you tell me that you're sorry. And if you're not sorry, you convince me that what I'm telling you to do is not right. So that gives the freedom of you feeling what's happening, thinking about what you're saying before you say I'm sorry. So it's a huge struggle to be raising two kids in a different culture. Because in the same time, we want to prepare them to be out and understand what people are asking them to do, but also navigating the culture differences at home, right? So that it was really interesting to hear that from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really, I think great perspective coming out of this part of the conversation. Identifying the sort of the unilateral language use in the United States, and then maybe even a rejection of anything else that might want to enter in, or maybe a discomfort with it, if you will, as opposed to speaking 5 languages. It doesn't happen here. It could, right? Given the diversity that we exist among. And I can't help but think about, I studied Blackfeet at the University of Montana. I took courses, I sat in those spaces. I was adopted out of the reservation pre-NICWA. This is pre-NICWA, so I'm kind of dating myself. But that said, for me, the language piece was always trying to get back home to something. And what that identifier was, and maybe to be able to even somehow codify that into me. And this big, huge desire to understand the Blackfeet people and culture. And had been around Hopi, the Lummi, and so forth, but it wasn't, we're not a monolith, so it's not where we came from or where I came from. And it really had a desperate desire to get better connected. So the language course was one of those things, and as I'm going through this and accommodating and so forth, first of all, being able to learn it at the university was just mind-blowing, and I was on board immediately. And that said, started that process, right? But at the same time, the history of why that is brutal. Boarding schools, generations of our elders who refused to teach the next generation the language because they were working to protect those young people from harm. And they knew the extreme measures that were being applied in these areas. I mean, here and around, to Indigenous peoples to get us on board with English and English ways of being and existing. And that to me is inescapable in this conversation, and how important language is. It definitely leads into my next question, and we actually were even discussing in the back before coming on stage, which I really wish it was like, man, I wish this was starting right now, because we're right into it, right? But the next question literally is, please describe a moment in your life when code switching felt like a cost to your personal dignity. And please talk about something beyond this, but I have to bring it up. We were talking about names. We were talking about indigeneity and the names and how we connect to these things culturally. And you exist with ancestral names that are all included in your presentation and how you fill out paperwork and so forth. 5 different names, if I'm remembering correctly. And is that always an easy thing to navigate? And I haven't had to think about that, right? But do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, no problem. So my name, I have 5 names. So my name is Janaina Vieira-Marques. when I came to the United States, and I fill up, when I came to the United States, I had to fill up a lot of papers to start my process of getting my green card and being a permanent resident here. And one thing that I realized is that I put my entire name in all the papers, but when I start getting my documents, you know, first of all, like my driver's license or my social security number, things like that, people would cut my name in a way that did not make any sense. Because in most of the documents, there was no enough space for the names. And I would have and I would complain about this. Like, first of all, was problematic, right? Because I became 3 different people with my name spelled different ways, my last name in all these documents. And then when I decided that I was applying for citizenship, the only way I could navigate that was by changing my name, reducing my name, and then I hyphenated 2 of my names, because none of the documents could fit all of my names on it. This was really tragic for me because I grew up in a culture where your names are important. They are part of your story. They tell you who was your grandfather, your great-grandmother, your dad. You know, it's just like they carry a history that connects me to my ancestors. So I can't tell you how many jokes I had in this culture when I would tell people would ask me my last name, and I would tell them my last name. They would laugh at me. And they would say, whoa, 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 this is too big. And it was like, in comparison to what? Right? And what's the reference? Is the reference the United States of America only? This is me. This is the story that I carry with me. Is my great-grandmother, I'm the only granddaughter that carries in my family my grandma's middle name, Angelica. And I'm proud of this, right? So I know that carry, and I can use that in the United States. Even if I say my 2 last name, Vieira-Marques, it's still like a little bit, I can see people like, oh my gosh, how to spell that? And I was like, and then I have to navigate. But yeah, I think that was a big cost. And I feel that when I go back to Brazil, I use my full name. When I come here, I have to shorten my name. There was a little lost with this. And now, as I'm raising 2 kids in this country, and I wanted them to be proud of their ancestors, right? But I can't fit all the names in the documents either. But they have all the names in the Brazilian passport. It's a really hard situation, I think, to navigate. If you think about like in terms of lost or identity or sense of belonging or connection to your own ancestors, right? This is something that I think that was took away from me, and I didn't have as much to say, right? I could be fighting all the time and say, hey, this is my 5 last names, or I can reduce that and just not have to be thinking and talking about this all the time. Yeah, I don't know for sure if that was the right decision, but I don't think I had a choice when it has to do with documents, social security, identity, or even filling out like surveys. There was no enough space. Really interesting.
And so like in Brazil, you're not greeted with, holy smokes, right? When you start issuing your name, it's not taken in a way that is maybe seen as like enough already, like simplify this for me, please.
In Brazil, as many last name you have, that shows that you know your history, it is actually beautiful. There are people that can have 20 last names, and this person can know these stories and their ancestors' last names. So it's just kind of, it's a beautiful sign. People would say like, oh wow, do you know like 7 of your ancestor's name. You have 8, so it's kind of like a proud thing to have. And I think it is connects a little bit with the Portuguese and the Spanish, because they were the two countries that colonized Brazil, and this is the idea of you know, carrying your ancestors with you and knowing where you came from.
I know that in indigenous communities, particularly here in the state of Montana, knowing not just name, but name of people in a community tells that same story. We don't have the 5 names personally attached, but that is, do you know, many of our greetings are literally asking, do you know Leonard? Do you know, etc. To try and connect to that expression of that larger historical narrative. And I didn't understand it largely here until I was actually integrating and working within my own birth community and learning, like, this is why we say it this way. Don't get annoyed, this is how it is, right? And so that was very eye-opening. Dylan, does that sound familiar at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a vast majority of anyone that's like around my dad's age, they ask who's your folks before they ask even my name. And as soon as I say it, oh, you're Chips' girl. And then I'm just Chips' girl for the rest of the conversation. Which I don't mind, you know, it's like, I think it connects me to that, to the culture in the way that is really comforting. And I think one of the things that Janaina's story makes me think of is how the through line between the 3 of us here is like this pressure, be it internal or external, to like make ourselves or we become more palatable to the broader culture in some way. And in a lot of ways it's like on your documents, like you can't escape that even if you try, you know. And so I think that's why I have such like a complicated relationship with code switching. In some ways it's like, I know that I do it and I know that it's something like subconscious, but in some ways I've done it to myself, you know, consciously. But it does feel like I am assimilating in some way, or like letting myself assimilate by getting embarrassed, you know, when I'm around, like if I go to Gaia and I know that I'm with my non-Indigenous friends and somebody comes up and says, who's your folks? And I say Chips, which is a res nickname, you know, I get embarrassed. And then I feel shame, you know. So I think it's a complicated thing. In one way you want to do it, you want that fitting in thing that we were talking about. And then in another way you just are angry that you have to at all, you know.
I mean, I think that's sort of the dignity piece that we're getting at. It's like, really, what is it costing us along the way? Do we think about that? I mean, is it something that we lend any sort of consideration toward? And when I ask these questions, so much of like what I'm thinking of as a social worker is, how is this impacting our sense of wellness, our sense of wholeness, our sense of an ability to exist as members with our own unique identities. And I do think that this is a really important conversation, and I applaud Cohesion for I think landing on this term, because I think what we're seeing politically is literally the elimination of variance, and there's a fear of pointing out that difference because it's going to make someone feel badly who supposedly is from here. And that's, not to point fingers entirely at the white identity, because I know that that's not a monolith either, nor should it be. But it's treated like, and spoken externally, as if that is true. And I find that fascinating, because it asks everyone on this stage and others in this space to hide in plain sight in many ways. And how do we work forward out of that to preserve our own sense of wellness, so we don't have to apologize when we walk into the room for how we present. That asking for patience is a good thing. It's part of our communication, and maybe empathy in those spaces as well is a good thing. It's not terrible. You had mentioned that the buses in Brazil make intentional spaces for the elderly, for people not just disability, but for respected generations, children, pregnancy. There's like this, don't sit here because we're saving this space for this person in our community. And I was loving that idea. And then I was thinking about, okay, let's push that idea here in this country. And thinking about the immediate reaction you would get to, you're limiting my rights, you're trampling on my freedoms, how dare you suggest such a crazy idea as to be intentional in how we respect one another and make space for each other. We seem to be doing it somewhat decently, I think, and we have, of course, federal laws for ADA assistance and disability and so forth. But the idea of imposing something like that to me in this country would be just met with ferocity. It would be immediate pushback. But that's I think kind of what we're getting into here is where we exist differently from one another, both internally and externally from the United States. I have a hard time even calling this country America because it's the continent. It's not the place. In fact, when people say, "Oh, welcome to America," it's like, you mean Canada and Mexico and the United States? No, we mean America. And that, like, to me is sort of layered into the identifier of what it is to be in this country and what the expectation is for those around you and so forth. And the code switching piece of it, I think, is really, really important because the mental health piece and how it impacts us and where we're making sacrifices along the way, consciously and unconsciously. How is that impacting us in the long term and in the short term and in those little experiences along the way? So, I put down my questions. I need to get back to my questions here. So, Moise, did you have anything to say on that cost of personal dignity? I wanted to make sure that we're not leaving you out of that part of the conversation.
Yeah, I can say just the identity is this for my country. If your father give you a name, is the symbol like something past in your tribe, like something your grandfather do something in the village, like to kill lion, like to kill buffalo. They give you that identity. So it's different. Like here when you have a baby, you can give a name you need to give. But in my country, it's not the same. For example, me, my grandfather, his name is Moses. My father is Moses. Me too, I'm Moses. Because my grandfather in the last year was a protector in the village. He killed 5 lions. So in the village, they say Moses is the savior. Moses is there to help people. So this is why I say the identity for somebody, it's like a symbol to tell you this guy, this name, it means something. This is why it's not good to give to your son, to your baby, what kind of name you need to give. Yeah. Think before you give the name to somebody. Yeah. This is why I'm just.
I think in this country, and even myself, that practice growing up in the family that I did was very much like flipping through a book, right? Trying to find the name that I thought, and thinking about it, but not having that sort of lineage connection to that conversation. Thank you for that. Yes, Dylan.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about, I think it was your first response when you were talking about like why you make the art that you do. I feel like that question, his art is like a direct sort of like combatant against that of like, because that was something I wanted to add actually with like making yourself be seen and also like the place where you come from, showing the parts that you're proud of and the parts that are beautiful instead of the parts that people think of. Sort of combats that, like it's saying like, no, I am here and this is the part that I am proud of. I just wanted to add that quick.
Thank you. So a question to the panelists, and also, of course, to you, and to really think about this, because this also comes to mind, in terms of what might be characterized as the dominant culture, or the American culture, albeit that whatever that is, looking from your perspective outward into that world, how do you see code switching either coming back or how other people practice it? Is it something that you observe in the dominant culture?
Yes. I actually think that comes, it kind of wraps around to, or nice big hug around the things that we've been talking about, where it's like, you know, in America, in the United States of America, on the landmass we call United States of America, there's such a strong grip on this idea of individuality and independence, where we kind of like, all for one, you know, like we're just our own little island that we constantly have to protect in America. And I feel like that we're constantly monitoring ourselves, or what the hell is professionalism? You know, that's so important to Americans. You can't have a certain kind of hair, you can't have a certain kind of dress, you have to have your tattoos, you can't talk a certain way. Which is like, it's ironic that like because we have such a sense of individuality, we become little robots when we enter the workforce. But I think that's definitely, like when I witness other people code switching, no matter what community they're from, it feels like to obtain this really strange platonic sense of independence and individuality, where it's like I make my own money and I stand on my own, and I instead of like embodying, you know, a sense of community or a sense of identity that's bigger than yourself. That's how I see other people code switch.
Okay. Is it about the culture?
Yeah, outside of what you experienced, do you see code switching in others that you observed?
In America, the culture of America and in my country is very different. I can give you one example. Here in America, you can never say to a lady, I love you 2 times. If you do that, you can call the police. It's real. You say I love you to somebody you don't know, like in bars, like you say, yeah, I love you, lady. I need something like that. So I remember one day I go with my friend, we go in the bus when we came here. So my friend, he see a lady and they say, Moses, I love this lady. I say, don't say nothing. In America and in Africa, it's very different. So he tried to say, hey, my sister, I love you. I love you too much. So the sister is scared. What? You love me? So he started to say, I love you, and the lady say, if you do that again, I call the police. I say, oh, this is new for me. Yeah. So, but in my country, you can talk to the lady, say, hey lady, hey queen, I love you. And they say, okay, thank you. So, this is a different culture with Africa and the US. And another thing is, I see in America, everybody is free. Yeah, like here, your son, he can talk to his daddy, he can talk bad to his mother. Hey, mom, and you can never say nothing. But in Africa, like in my age, my mom can beat me, and I stay quiet. I stay quiet. My father can beat me, and I stay quiet. But so this is a different image I see. Why I say that? I see one day I see a video in YouTube. I see a young boy. He talked bad to his mom. He said, "Mom, out! I need to close it." I said, "Oh!" Like in my country, if your father he come at home, everybody go out. When your father come after job, he come like he's tired. He need to relax. Everybody's go out. For example, like, I can give you another example. If we go to the table, we need to eat. I can never start to take something if my father start to take. We will stay like this. If we stay like 10 minutes, we wait for 10 minutes. So this is the many things I see. I say, oh, here is very freedom. Another example I can say about the media. Here you can say bad to the president. You can draw, you can make a picture of Biden with a big noise, with big head. Like in Africa, you can never do that. If you do that, it's finished for you. I know, yeah, you go to jail. I know some kids in my country is orphan. He made the picture of the president of big head, big noise, and he wrote something. He said, "This president is a killer. He's a bad president." So the teacher, when he see that, he go to show the police. He say, "Hey, look, this little boy, he made this." The little boy was arrested automatically. So this is a different culture, but we what can I say? We just learning little. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're saying about code switching. If other people here in America, you think other people code switching?
Yeah, do you observe it in people around you or maybe other circumstances or places?
Yeah, I believe we all do code switching to a certain extent. And I think that is, I a skill that's necessary for engaging with other people and other cultures and other ways of thinking. Some people code switch more and are more aware of others when they do, because it requires a lot of listening and understanding around you to be able to code switch. Yes, I think everybody does. And in fact, I have been talking to my own kid about this. Just thinking about them growing up and learning how to dress in a certain way for different occasions. And I always get this pushback saying something that I always said before, but now it's changing, the dialogue is changing. I would say, hey, we're gonna go to this place, why don't you dress in a certain way, because that's an event. And my kid would push back and say, I do whatever I want with my own body, my choices. It's my choice. You can't control that. And so that made me think about, yes, it is your choice, it is your body, but also it's okay to learn a little bit how to code switch. It doesn't mean that you change what you inside and you change your thoughts, but you learn how to navigate different situations with different people, different culture, different ways of being in the world. Because I feel that if you don't code switch in a certain extent, maybe it's what the clothes that you're wearing, or maybe it's the language that you're using, you become like a little bit isolated. And especially in a world that's so globalized, right? You want to just understand that there's not just one way of being, there's many ways of being. I have a story that I like to think about because that was such a beautiful embrace when I came to the United States, and I was not aware of the cultural differences in that point in time. So I was living in Maryland, and I had just arrived, maybe I would say like a month. I just had arrived from Brazil, and my husband's family live in Maryland, so we went to visit and meet with his friends from the university, and we went to a public swimming pool. First of all, Brazilians' bikinis are very different than American bikinis, as you can imagine. So that is the first change when you get to the swimming pool and everybody has one piece and you have one really small piece, two pieces that's really small, and then you see there's 5 people waiting to greet you for the first time. So the place that I'm from, when we meet somebody, that when I was growing up, we kiss 3 times. So look at the time that you say. That is the time that you take to greet somebody. For the first time, somebody that you don't know. As I got older, the 3 kisses became 2 kisses. So when I came there, I was thinking, wow, this is people that went to the university with my husband. They know each other since they are young. They are here to greet me, and I'm gonna just talk to them in a way that they're kind of family, right? That was my thought process. So I came to the swimming pool. They gave me the hand. I held their hand and I kissed everybody, every 5 people, 3 times in their cheeks. And I had no idea that people didn't kiss here. I had 0 idea. And then they kissed me back. We went on, we swim together, we laughed. I barely spoke English. Some of them spoke Spanish and I could speak Spanish, so we could connect a little bit. And then by the time we left the swimming pool, my husband told me, wow, that never crossed my mind, but I forgot to tell you that people normally here, they don't kiss, they just give a hand. And I was just so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed, and I was thinking, I don't want to see these people anymore, right? I just arrived in the United States. But now that I have been here for a while, and I look and I reflect back in this story, I think about these people being so gracious, and also code switching with me, understanding that I came from a different place, I had a different way of navigating the world, and they were receiving me in the way that did not make me feel conscious about what I was doing. It was so lovely and so beautiful that I'm actually thankful for having those people receiving me and greeting me for the first time without censoring me.
Yeah, growing up in the late 80s, graduating high school, back when MTV used to play music, there was a show that was called MTV Raps. I don't know if anyone, MTV Raps. Anyone remember? Yeah. I mean, when that hit, it hit hard. And I remember, like, prior to that, living in a place like Bellingham, Washington, north of Seattle, most people knew, like, The Cure and Depeche Mode and whatever, band was happening, Whitesnake. There was a lot of metal, heavy metal, and this kind of a thing. That was what was available. MTV Raps hit, and this is the craziest thing. And it's not until now that I'm actually looking back on this and really kind of thinking about it. But the people I was in school with, some of them rural, some of them more sort of like inner city, had a way of being. There was a presentation. And it was very United Statesian, right? And it was of its place, and it sounded, the folks sounded alike, right? There was a way of speaking. And if you go to a place like Boston, you're going to get a similar kind of experience where you're going to see a lot of people talking very similar. Well, MTV Raps hits, and this cohort of people that I knew in my life, who I knew spoke a certain way all along, suddenly were speaking hip hop, like street, thick, heavy, street, gangster rap, hip hop, dialect. Suddenly there was like baggy pants, and these are all like white folks. And the hat suddenly went a different way, like that, and it was like overnight. It was the craziest thing. And there was this I saw that there was this attempt to kind of accommodate, in some way appropriate, we'll put it that way as well. And to me it was fascinating because the whole attitude about the world around us also changed in a similar way. Where the attitudes and the desire to be that identity overrode the histories and the friendships that I'd had in that space with these people. And suddenly these people that I knew, I no longer knew. Or I knew them in a different way. And that was a huge like flip. It was the weirdest. It was like, I mean, if everyone here started speaking in Scottish accents because it was cool on TV or because of a movie you watched, it would be the most bizarre thing. And here I am experiencing this in real time. And then we're getting back to the code switching piece. I would see these same people with those new attitudes and personas, then turn around and speak to their parents or their grandparents. And suddenly they were back to the people that I knew. They were speaking in that tone that in cadence and everything else that I was familiar with. And that blew my mind. Because you talk about freedom, right? And this ability to make choices along the way and so forth. And you can become and speak and do in many ways, or at least that's in principle kind of the idea. And I think at the time no one really pushed back against it. I mean, I think some people did, but it was neither here nor there. And those same people now that I know in this adulthood, that's all gone. They're back to the same people they were prior to that shift. And that is anomalous, of course. I don't know if anybody else, if it was the same here in Missoula or what have you. Maybe it was. But the code switching piece that I see in other people can sometimes be received as offense, maybe even. And I don't really want to get into cultural appropriation in this conversation necessarily, but the idea that in this country we should have the ability to make those pivots, but I think politically we're moving into a space now in this current time where existing in your own identity is somehow thrust against another person's sense of comfort. Laws are being passed to limit the celebration of identity because it makes someone uncomfortable. So we're becoming, interestingly enough, less free. And depending on which, I think, identity or subset you come from, maybe that less free was something that kind of existed all along. And the drawing attention, I think, to how we are limited and the expectation we place on others and ourselves and how we accommodate in our space doesn't always lend to the healthiest sense of existence or expression. Which is why thank you for the topic here today. I do know that we are getting to the end of our presentation time. We're going to break into Q&A here in a second. We're going to ask our audience members to, like, as we've been going through these questions and so forth, do you have questions for our audience, or maybe comment, or just, hey, how you doing? And we'll move into the Q&A part, and then we'll do a little wrap up at the end, and we'll see if we've got time for one more question. And this really kind of, I think, brings us to my final point. When we code switch, are we striving to make others comfortable? And I think we've kind of answered that. But the other part is, if so, what are we protecting those people from?
Good question. My first instinct is sort of to say that I'm protecting myself first, right? I do think that there is, though, when we're protecting people from being uncomfortable, I think it kind of goes into that feeling of, like, I don't want to bring up, I don't want to bring up history when I'm just hanging out with my friends, I want to bring up Manifest Destiny when we're just watching a movie. But I do think that there is, like, a level of, like, I don't want to remind people that I'm different. I don't want to remind people that there's a reason why I'm acting different around them. Either if that is, like, protecting them from truth, protecting them from confrontation, protecting them from guilt. Because all of those things I don't want people to feel. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable around me. But I do think that these kinds of spaces, and also just, like, exposing people, like, any chance that I get, I'm going to bring a non-Indigenous person to Indian Days, to the powwow, any chance, just so that they can have that moment of, like, experiencing another community, experiencing, they're the other now. No, but I think that would probably be what I'm protecting them from.
Thank you, Dylan.
I can say for me, I'm protected by myself because I must be careful. This is not my country. I'm new here. So what I do every day when wake up, every month when I plan something to do, I need to be sure if I'm in peace with everybody, like in my job, like my neighbor, to don't get trapped with somebody. I pay my rent, I pay everything, I pay my insurance car. Yeah, for me, it's like I need to be safe. Nobody can protect your life. First one is you. So this is something I learned when I came here in America. I say, well, I know in America is you need to follow the law. You say law? You have to follow the law. For example, like in my country, you can pay your rent after 3 months, and you say to the company, hey, I don't have money, I will pay you after 3 months, and he can understand. But here, after five, hey, your money, pay. So this is why I say that I need to first one to protect by myself. Yeah. This is very important for me.
Thank you.
I don't think I ever thought about code switching. It's a way of protecting others, but more protecting myself, or enhancing my possibilities navigating through different situations and people. But there was a time, and that was recently, that I had somebody calling me Jay in the place that I was working, and I thought twice. That made me super uncomfortable because I'm not Jay. It's like, can you tell my name? Can you say my name? We work, or we have been working, or we had worked before, so you know me. And I decided not to say anything. And when I decided not to say anything, that made me super uncomfortable. As I'm thinking, why am I doing this? But I think that I was maybe protecting myself from spending the time to have to justify something that I think that should happen automatically, you know. But I never thought about doing that because I'm necessarily protecting others from feeling uncomfortable. I think it's more thinking about me as navigating, and how can I navigate the world like in a very smooth way, and sometimes not even calling attention to myself. I think that was the point. It's like, should I navigate and engage in a conversation to say how important it is for you to say my name, and then at the same time my question was how important that is if my relationship with that person might not be that big. Does that make sense? How far I go, and should I put that spotlight on me? Because I have put a spotlight on me in the work that I have before. I was working in a school in Missoula that says to be very embraced of differences in others, and actually I found out that was not the case. It was a very traumatic situation, and many times I shine away from saying what I was feeling or what I thought that would be ideal, from not having the spotlight on me, being the only person of color in the staff, you know. So I think that, yeah, the protection of yourself and feeling secure about what's happening, especially when you're an immigrant, it's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about code switching, or how much attention I'm going to give to a certain subject matter.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot to reflect on, of course, in this conversation. And the the concept of immigrant, particularly on this continent, as Indigenous people, is we see and recognize a lot of immigration, whether it's part of one's history, as well as how we navigate this country that we live in. There's a lot of immigration there as well. We move from one place to another. You take the brave steps of introducing yourself to a new community. Oftentimes, it doesn't come with the same intensive, I think, language barriers, but similar type social practices and so forth. This is how we do it here. This is how we don't do it here, right? And so forth. And I'm trying to get a better understanding of ourselves in those places, and how we view these concepts in relationship to ourselves and the larger world around us. I know that for myself that it's also self-protection. I mean, I would say that that is the larger part of it. I also recognize that I'm 6'1", I'm 210 pounds, I think. I'm brown, I'm native at a glance, and when I walk into a space, there's some people don't have poker faces, we'll put it that way. And my partner who identifies as white, this is the first time she's ever seen that or experienced that coming into a space. And so it's answering a lot of questions in terms of like, oh, okay, I get code switching now. I get it. It's a way to reduce the amount of attention that you receive, and how that attention is delivered. Sometimes it's awkward and weird. In fact, the last conversation that we had here, there was a gentleman on the way out who I believe was trying to be generous, but at the same time was like, whoa, dude. The comment was, you speak really well. For a Native American. And all of a sudden, all of those images of John Wayne movies and all of that business came up, as well as that sort of code switched Indigenous lilt that you'll get from, and you can tell like when someone's from this tribe or that tribe, etc., what that lilt looks and sounds like. And then I imagine that it was fitted in there somewhere, but at the same time, it was like, well, this is how I grew up, right? I'm reflecting the world that is around me, and so forth. And that part was involuntary, and it was an interesting thing to draw attention to. But that said, it starts to kind of hit us in all those ways, in gender identity, and our racial identity, and our cultural identity, and how we see ourselves economically, and so forth, because that code switching happens there as well, in terms of how we look at ourselves and so forth. But that said, thank you very much to each of you for taking the time to explore some of these questions. I know, like we had said at the beginning, it's very nuanced. There's no sort of black and white code switching protocol, if you will. I think we all do it in our own kind of ways, and there's no rule book for it either in terms of how we experience it. But I think the conversation here is to draw greater awareness around how we interact and engage in those ways, and so that we can maybe be a little more generous, humble, accommodating in our own way. And I think that's part of the goal of these conversations as well. But before we go any further, I know that we're kind of chewing into this piece of time, and I want to turn it over to the audience, and we can all, I think, hear you pretty well. Please, I invite you now, after this conversation, to ask some questions of our audience members, or of our panelists, excuse me, or a comment that maybe something that came up for you as we were going through this. So let's bring you into the conversation. Yes?
First of all, thank you so much for hosting this valuable conversation for people to listen and hear. And as far as like conversation and storytelling, like super important. We don't give enough credit to conversations and oral traditions as kids. Something that's been sticking with me, one of the first things you said is, our shared experiences not only in dealing with trauma as BIPOC, but also as that mirth piece. And I've been thinking a lot about it lately as someone who's done it, is like a lot of that mirth, that humor, that comedy is so integral to not only my culture, but a lot of other people's culture. And that sense of familiarity with your people and your culture when you're doing like play fighting, you give nicknames, when you're laughing really loud, too loud. And I wanted to ask and have maybe panelists reflect on what that looks like as far as maybe the personal life that with code switching, but also in art. Because I find as a writer that a lot of my mirth and humor and comedy comes from that observation, the knowledge already that there is a difference, and I'm seeing it, and there's some form of strange observant comedy that comes up that I feel like is very inherent to the way BIPOC speak to each other and like cross-culturally too.
Can I just make sure that I understand your question? So are you asking if in our work as artists, you can see that connection, the cultural connection with our the place that we came from, like it maybe like you see nuances in our work that shows that, and then you're saying, give an example as you as a writer, you see that coming up in your work. Is that what you're asking, or are you asking specifically like for the funny part? I'm not
Well,
sure.
not everybody would share first, but I see it a lot, especially for people who might not even code switch languages technically, you're still speaking English, but if you have like a dialect or something, but how it relates to, that shared experiences, that familiarity in when you speak to other people, when you're code switching within your culture, how that might relate to the work that you do, or do you find that in strange places it pops up, like where do you see it?
Can I comment on this?
Please.
Yeah, I think it's funny. When I was just talking about this, one of the things that I feel like Indians are always known for is we always cover our mouth when we laugh. Like that's always a thing that I always see is cover your mouth when you laugh, because we have big old Indian laughs. That can be kind of annoying. Well, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't anymore. But I think that when you're talking about that, I'm a musician. My brother's a musician. We grew up in the same place, and we always get the comment after shows that there's, we really like to banter. And I don't know if that's just because we're kind of hams and we like to make people laugh, or if that's an Indian thing. So that's what that made me think of.
There's definitely, what you touch on oftentimes enters, I think, into a much larger conversation where we talk about resilience. And I mean, I think that's felt across any sort of community where oppression is a factor. Humor, that at least for Indigenous people, in our writing, you watch Reservation Dogs, which is just the perfect example of what you're talking about, where you have the hardship and the struggle, but you also can take a sense of humor about it, and it becomes the sort of that richness of your ability to navigate those things and survive. I do know that I hear this quite a lot on campus from Indigenous students who really want to draw attention to that. This idea that we're always kind of caught up in the loss, in the oppression, in the land back, in all of those things, and it becomes very two-dimensional, I think, in terms of how an outside or larger world interprets that. But even if you look at recovery communities like alcoholics, right? Recovering alcoholics find humor in some of the darkest stuff, in some of the worst moments of their existence. as a way to kind of celebrate the fact that, ooh, damn, I lived through that. And not only did I live through it, but I have a pretty good feeling that someone else in this space has lived through it as well. And it becomes a strength, particularly when, you know, it's not all gloomy and so forth, but I think amidst those struggles and those things where we're finding dignity being shelved oftentimes, or where we're having to change our names and so forth, humor becomes the way that we kind of move through it and look back on it and kind of laugh on those moments, while also still remembering the pain and the discomfort. That's at least kind of what I'm hearing in your question, if that's accurate enough or not. Anyone else?
With your work being in Montana, do you find yourself code switching during your presentations of your work with different audiences? Like, how does that manifest?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, just thinking about like at least the work that I do, there's is multifaceted because I give training to you know, docents and teachers and teaching artists, and I navigate. I work with artists that are, you know, it's the communication is just easier than when you work with somebody that might be an elder and have been in this country for a long time. So yes, the presentation, the way of the posture, the way perhaps I dress sometimes is always thinking about the audience that I have around me. Does that make sense? Which is different when I'm in a social engagement and instead of being a professional field or in a professional occasion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm wondering, though, like with your public works, when you work a lot with BIPOC students too, like, are you creating work for just a BIPOC audience, or like does it shift when you talk to a non-BIPOC audience about the same work?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I think like most of my work carry this a little bit as whoever knows what I have been doing in Missoula for a while, carries this lenses of social justice somehow. And what I think about, when I'm in a group of BIPOC artists or communities, I feel at home, right? I feel that I can be seen. I understand that people might have some similar struggles. So the conversation would be like this, you know, like it's comfortable, but then when I'm doing your work with perhaps a BIPOC group, thinking about the audience is going to be the general public. And when you think about general public, you think about perhaps some people that can be BIPOC and some people would not. I think about how to work that language and stretch that language to overcome boundaries. And it's really interesting that you asking me this question, because it is a thought process. And it happens all the time in the work that I do, in the communities that I'm immersing myself with. And when you think about BIPOC, you think about a group that's not only, you know, in my case, Brazilians or Black or Indigenous. It's such a huge group of people with a specific and different culture identity, right? So I try to navigate those interactions respectfully and aware, and try to be aware of those differences when I'm having those conversations. Does that answer your question?
There's the work that I do, and we touched on this a little bit last time, is a mentor of mine who is a Irish artist from Boston had told me one time when I was quite a bit younger that an artist is a window to their time. That's the function of an artist, is to interpret their vision in the world that they live in. And you are expressing that, of course, in sharing that history and so forth. For me, I grew up in suburban white America. I mean, and I think when people look at me and I talk about Indigenous as being a Native artist, folks are looking for the beading and the feathers and all of that iconography, if you will, or sometimes it could even be perceived as tropes. That said, that's not how I work. I look at fashion, right? And I think about style, and I grew up on movies, and so that speaks, I think, the loudest to me. So my work's very cinematic in its interpretation, but it's all imagined. But what do I imagine? What do I reach into when I do that imagination? And people have commented on it and asked me, Joseph, why do you paint white people? Seems to be that that's all you paint is white people. Why aren't you painting where's the horses and the ledger art, and where's the face paint and so forth? It's like, well, yeah, I visit that as well, but I also just paint what I see and what I'm familiar with. And having to have that conversation with Indigenous communities as well as non-Indigenous communities, I think, is the kind of thing when people come in and look at the work, they're like, this is not what I expected. But it is sort of that unique, individualized interpretation of the world around us, both through an Indigenous person's lens, as well as that person who code switches as well along the way. What about the music?
I try really hard not to. I feel like I wrote about this in my bio a little bit. It's something that I've been trying to find the words for a long time. When I'm obviously, lyrics are going to be shaped by personal experiences and lenses and what have you, but I feel the music that I've always loved the most is folk music that can be passed down through generations, different players, but the same play. And so I try to write that kind of music, and I feel like the beauty in that when it comes to sharing my Indigenous experiences within music is trying to make those experiences feel resonant to anybody who's listening to them. And then you learn someone with the last name Runningcrane wrote this, and you hopefully the intention there is that you feel a little bit closer to indigeneity. Humanizes it a bit. Though I will say that I feel like the audiences that I'm the most comfortable in, even being as a performer, as a part of the audience, is that moment when they start giving the land acknowledgement and they say, Salish, Kalispel, Blackfeet. And then if I feel good in that audience when they say Blackfeet, I want to give a war whoop. But if I'm not in a safe audience, I don't. So that's another part of that.
For me, my work for me, is when I need to paint something, I need to show what I feel inside of me. Because the African painting is like when you see something, what can I say? I can say this in French, but in English it is difficult. Let me try. So, the African painting is, we have 3 colors we use many times in African painting. We use the blue color, the red color, the green color, and the yellow color. All these colors have the symbol. So when I make something, I know this color, it means that. For example, I can say the yellow color. The yellow, it means the minerals of Africa. We have minerals, but Africa is poor. So when I use the blue is the sky. So it means God, for some people, from some African, God created Africa and give us minerals, but the continent is poor. So if I take, for example, the green is the nature of Africa. For example, I see lion, I see zebra, I see antelope, I see elephant. So when I make something, I know I need to show something. So if somebody see if I do something and somebody see that, he can automatically have a picture and say, oh, this is an African painting. This is for me. When I work every day, I need to show that image. So for American painting, what I see in American painting, I see the image of the good technology, the future. I see the how do you call it? To promote something good in the future. For example, like good informatic, good scientific, good astronaut. So when I check the American painting, if you are a good painter, when you see that, you see something is good in the future. It's different with African painting, like European painting, like Asia painting. So when I see, like for example, Asia painting, I see some different country. Like if you see Chinese painting, you see the culture. Chinese refuse to change, refuse to change the identity. They have the same culture for them. So if you check, for example, the Indian painting is the same. Indian painting is a religion. You see the god of four hands like this. So this is a different work in this world, but this is my passion for me to show what is the African painting. Yeah.
Look, very much communicating in that space. And I think all of us working to do so with a voice of authenticity that is true to our own identities, and I think where we come from. So thank you, of course, everyone. I'm sure if we have more questions, I invite everyone to come up afterward, engage, get to know these folks in our community, and make time to say hello and so forth. We're going to do an outro here in just a second. Before we launch into that, I just really quickly want to go through each of you. What is happening in your art right now? Where can we see it? Where can we hear your music? What is the venue that we can go and observe? Is there an online thing? And go. We'll start with you, Dylan.
You can follow my Instagram, Dylan R. Crane, Dylan RC Music. I'll write it down somewhere. Maybe at the front. And I have a show here next week on Wednesday.
For me, you can follow me on Facebook, Bushiri Moses, and I plan for next year. I need to to make a book of kids. So I need to make a history of a little boy. His name is Kumba. So it's a story of a little boy, he born with food, and they start to speak. So it's a good story. I think next year we will see that.
For me, if you want to know anything about what I'm doing, you can go to my website, JanainaVieira-Marques.com, or you can find me at the Missoula Art Museum. Right now, what I'm doing, I'm coordinating 4 different programs this summertime that involves schools visiting the museum for connecting with Terra Alaskan artwork, developing a lot of educational materials for that, and working in collaboration with April Rowe and Chris Ramirez and the team's mural they're putting together for this August. It's going to be, do you remember the date? The opening, I think maybe 18th, August 18th, going to be in the alley of the Stevens Hoop. Yeah, and as I'm working as a graphic designer and art director too on the side, you're going to probably see some of my pieces around here or close to the river. I just finished an illustration for the Big Hole Watershed Committee for an infographic about the our water and the river systems. Yeah, so just look for, I think I'm the only Janaina in Missoula.
So come on down, April. April's going to take us out, and thank you everyone, of course, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing your creativity as well as we move forward, and thank you, Cohesion.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Janaina, Moise, and Dylan and Joseph. As always, these events are free and open to everyone. We aim to create a safe space that is an inviting place to learn and share about culture. The Cohesion Advisory Committee is a team of all volunteer local arts and culture leaders. I want to give our team a huge round of applause. If you're here, please wave up high when I say your name, but also I want to give these guys another round of applause first. Michelle Boulay, Mia Hammond, Christy Ramirez, Janaina Vieira-Marques, and Stella Knoll. We want to give a huge thank you to the ZAC team for providing this beautiful space and hosting us the 2nd year in a row. Thank you to MCAT for recording these important conversations. So if you ever want to watch these again, or if you've missed any in the series, you can watch them later on with our MCAT recordings. And then our last topic in this 3-part speaker series is equity next month, August 13th, 2 to 4 p.m. right here in this room. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you next month.